And greetings, saints of the Most High, and welcome to another installment of the Messianic Torah Observer. I'm Rod Thomas, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules this week to fellowship with me. Well, here as I am recording, it is preparation day in anticipation of this coming Sabbath, day of rest in Yeshua Messiah. It is, taking a look at my little trusty calendar here, as I'm recording it, it is the 20, well, actually, it is the 1st of March. The 1st of March, 2024, and the 19th day of the 12th biblical calendar month of Yah's sacred calendar year. We are inching ever so closely, for those of us who keep the observational calendar, to the start of a brand new biblical calendar year. And as we get closer and I get more information from our inspectors and our searchers over in the land of Israel, in terms of the observational criteria for the biblical Rosh Hashanah, I will certainly let you know whether or not the Aviv is Aviv, if the barley is Aviv. I'm going to get this straight, that the barley is Aviv in a state of maturation that is called Aviv, and if we do cite the new moon. This is all important because if we don't get the start of the biblical year right, beloved, we miss the appointed times of Yah throughout his calendar year. He has made a date for us to meet with him, and he expects us to be there on the day that he has appointed. So it's important for us to make sure we get the date right. I know a lot of people don't put a lot of stock in it. They rather just go ahead with the calculated calendar and let things rip as it has been ripping all along for the past several centuries. But there are some of us, and I do not disparage anyone who keeps the calculated calendar. God bless you. That doesn't stop us from fellowshipping. I love you just the same. You're still my brother, and I'm looking forward to the day that Yeshua, when he comes, he will set everything right, and we will all be on the same page following the same calendar. So that's coming. In the meantime, we do the best with what we have available to us, to the best of our knowledge and the best of our ability. My hope, trust, and prayer, as always, beloved, in this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer is that you, your families, and fellowships are well and blessed. Well, this week's Torah reading is the 122nd reading of our 3-year Torah portion reading cycle. Our reading is found in Numbers chapter 32, verses 1 through 42. I will not be reading this reading, because we're talking 42 verses, and I want to make sure I do not abuse your time with me. So I'm going to give you an overview, my thoughts and reflections of this Torah reading, and I pray that you will have the time to go ahead and just read through this Torah reading and study it, and most importantly, meditate on it and allow Father's Spirit to communicate with you so that you can glean from it his eternal truths, his instructions in righteousness. Now, I've entitled this teaching, The High Expectations for God's People to Fulfill His Will and Purpose. Again, the high expectation for Yah's or God's people to fulfill his will and purpose. My thoughts and reflections on Torah reading 122. I'm sorry. I am really trying to crank this out, beloved, because I am late and I really want to get going on this so that you have it at the start of your Shabbat. So let's just do a quick overview of the Transjordan region. What do I mean by the Transjordan region? Well, this is very important to us in this reading because it's the region that Reuben, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, or Manasseh as frequently referred to, have chosen to make their home outside to the east of the Jordan River. That's why it's called Transjordan. This region is called in some instances Gilead. Gilead is east of the Jordan River. And our reading records that Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, or Manasseh, would ultimately occupy this region. After the conquest, they will start establishing their homes before the conquest begins, but once the conquest takes place, the land is pacified, the other 9 tribes take possession, or 10 tribes, I should say, take possession of the land. Then Gad, Reuben, and the half tribe of Manasseh will return to Gilead, or the Transjordan area or region, and resume their peaceful lives there, at least for a certain amount of time. But many centuries prior to the time frame of our reading, scripture records that Jacob, fled here when he covertly left his family and his belongings from Laban. Laban was his father-in-law. And this story is found and recorded in Genesis chapter 31. And it is here that scripture records that Joseph, was sold to an Ishmaelite caravan by his brothers. And this is recorded in Genesis chapter 37. Now, beyond these patriarchs, more contemporaneously with our present reading, it is here that we seized this land from Sihon. Remember Sihon, as recorded in Numbers chapter 21, verses 2 through 32? It was a number of Torah reading cycles ago. Recall that in those readings, Numbers chapter 21, that Sihon, S-I-H-O-N, Sihon, recall that he was the Amorite king who refused to allow us to, I call it, shortcut through his territory, the land of the Amorites. And this is all recorded in, again, Numbers chapter 21, verses 21 through 23. And it's reiterated in 2 other passages of the Tanakh, Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 26 through 37, and Judges chapter 11, verses 19 through 16. Now, scripture reveals Yah hardened Sihon's heart, such that he would not agree to our request to shortcut through the land of the Amorites, through his territory, somewhat like Yah did to Pharaoh in the hardening of his heart. And of course, it turns out that his hardened heart, again like Pharaoh before him over in Egypt, in Mitzrayim, would not bode well for him, as we would ultimately destroy him and seize his kingdom. And that is documented and recorded in Numbers chapter 21, verses 24 and 25. I guess what this shows is you don't mess with Yah's chosen ones, especially when they are walking in accordance to his ways, his will, and purpose. From there, Yah instructed us to destroy Og of Bashan, Og, O-G of Bashan, in the same general region. We were instructed to destroy Og of Bashan and seize his kingdom. And that's right in there with Numbers chapter 21, verses 33 through 35. It's also reiterated in Psalm chapter 135, verses 10 through 12, and Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 22. And as we will discuss here in our reading today, these lands would be given to our tribes of Gad, Reuben, and the half tribe of Manasseh, or Manasseh, at their request and upon completion of their obligation to assist their other tribal brethren in conquering Canaan proper. Overall, we of this second generation, this is the second generation in our reading, this is the second generation coming out of Egypt, we're preparing to go in and conquer Canaan. And this request by our Gadite, Reubenite, and Manasseh brethren, we will see came as a surprise to Moses. It was not part of the originally known plan that we, as Yah's chosen nation, would go into Canaan proper, conquer it, and take possession of it. So our Gadite and Reubenite brethren, along with that half tribe of Manasseh, approached Moses with the petition that they would settle in the region of Gilead, in that Trans-Jordan region, which included the lands formerly ruled by Sihon, the king of the Amorites, Og of Bashan. Og was the giant. Remember Og? He was a giant. He was of the bloodline of the Nephilim, but this is beyond our discussion here today. But it's an interesting study when we start to talk about the people that Og is descended from. So this land that Gad and Reuben and Manasseh, or Manasseh, would take was ruled by Sihon, Og of Bashan, and actually Balak of Moab. Okay? Now, we discussed this in our former, I wish I had gone back and researched that, but if you go ahead and go back through the last month or so Torah readings, last 30 to 40 days of Torah studies and posts, you will see where we discuss that. We discuss the conquest of these three kingdoms, these three cities or nations, however you want to call them. I think the scriptures refer to them more as nations or actually as kingdoms. Our Gadite, Reubenite, and Manasseh brethren stated their case to Moshe with seemingly warm cooperation and peaceful intent. They want this land. Turns out, why did they want the land? Well, it turns out that these three tribes were at this time in possession of a vast number of livestock. In Hebrew, mikneh. And the lands they had their hearts set on to the east of the Jordan, the Transjordan area, seemed to them perfect for raising and maintaining their vast animal stocks. And this is all recorded in chapter 32, verse 1 of our reading. Consequently, Moshe was concerned that if the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh were given the green light to settle in the lands they expressed interest in possessing, that we might have another incident akin to the spies incident of Numbers chapter 13 on our hands. What do I mean by the spies incident of Numbers chapter 13? Well, if you recall, beloved, a significant portion of our nation refused to go in and take possession of the land of Canaan, as Yah instructed us to do. And our nation's refusal was based on the negative report of the spies, the 10 spies, remember there were 12, 10 spies, one from each of the tribes, plus there was Caleb and Joshua. But these 10 spies gave a negative report of their findings. Of those 12 spies, only Caleb and Joshua gave us a positive report. And the two of them strongly encouraged us to obey Yah and go in and take the land. We can do it. Let's do it. We have Yah on our side. We can take them without a problem. That's what they said to us. But most of us refused to listen to Caleb's and Joshua's words, and we as a nation rebelled against Jehovah and Moshe. We disobeyed Yah's instructions to go in and take the land. Most of us refuse to listen to Caleb's and Joshua's words, their encouraging words, and we as a nation rebelled against Jehovah and Moshe. This historic incident falls within the Hebrew concepts of Heni, spelled Heni, Heni, and Tenuah, spelled Tenu apostrophe AH, Tenuah, Heni and Tenuah. In his initial presumption that the petitioning tribes of Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh were up to some monkey business, that is, that their intentions for not going in to help take possession of the land with their other tribal brethren was somehow similar to the intentions we had as a nation in response to the 10 spies' negative report. So Moses, being the astute and discerning leader that he was, says to these Gadite and Reubenite leaders, he says to them, why would you turn the will of the Israelites? Pay attention to this. He says to them, why would you turn the will of the Israelites? Our English term, turn, is hani, Heni, Heni. Hani means to nullify or to retract, as well as turning the thoughts and will of another from their intended will. So he says, why would you endeavor to try to dissuade your brethren to turn away from Yah's will? What are you up to? Why would you do that? Baruch A. Levine addresses this Hebrew term Heni as used here by Moses, within the general context of when we annul vows, when we annul oaths and obligations. Mr. Levine also introduces us to the term tenuah, which is a situation where an individual or a people denies and treats the will and plan of Jehovah as though it was nothing, as though it was something to be scoffed at or dismissed. Clearly, Moshe didn't want any repeat of such foolishness as we experienced in response to the spy caper many years prior. Thus, Moses brings up that spy incident and the ensuing punishment we endured for adhering to the negative voice of the 10 spies. He brings this up to Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh. Our tenuah, remember, tenuah is a situation where an individual or a group of people denies and treats the will of Yah as though it was something not worth paying attention to. We are scoffing at it. We dismiss it. So he brings up this thing, and our tenuah condemned us, he says, to wander in the wilderness until the first Exodus generation died out, except for Caleb and Joshua. And this is a reference to Numbers chapter 14, verse 29. And so Levine suggests that with our previous tenuah, in the forefront of Moses' memory that maybe that same Tenuah might be behind Reuben's and Gad's desire to remain in the lands east of the Jordan. That they viewed Yah's promises and plans for our nation as illegitimate. He says, quote, "For to remain east of the Jordan was, in effect, to remain outside the promised land, to refuse to undertake its conquest." End quote. And again, this was from Baruch A. Levine in his commentary entitled Numbers 21 through 36, a new translation with introduction and commentary. So why is this such a big deal? Well, when we disregard Yah's promises and instructions, which are often connected to his commands to obey him and to go and do what will bring about the fulfillment of those covenantal promises, we symbolically communicate to Yah as well as to the world that we are not committed to Yah, that we don't really have a true relationship with Yah, that what he says to us and what he instructs to us mean nothing to us. When we do not commit ourselves to Yehovah as his covenant people, whether it's individually or whether it's as a community or as a nation, when we do not commit ourselves to him as his covenant people, we displease and upset him. And this is definitely referred to here in verses 10 and 11 of our Torah reading passage here today. Again, this is related in many ways to our reneging on our promises and commitments, such as our vows, our oaths, and obligations, as we discussed last week in Torah reading 121. So, as a follow-up to our previous reading, the importance of keeping our vows, oaths, and obligations is once more reiterated here in this story. To Tenuah and to Heni, the vows, oaths, and obligations that we make to Jehovah and to others is a transgression of Yah's Torah. That is, it is a sin. Dare I say that to nullify our promises is a showstopper as it relates to our making it into the kingdom. I say, beloved, that it is imperative that we repent of any such acts in our lives and we seek Yah's forgiveness if we've ever ventured into the realm of Tenuah and Heni. And from there, once we've repented and asked Yah's forgiveness, then we need to correct the denials and nullifications that we made, the Tenuahs and the Henes, and to the best of our ability, and not repeat those sins again. Some of us, some situations we can't. The situations have long passed, and it's not really possible to fix those oaths and vows and obligations that we've broken. The shelf life on those things have come and gone. I've personally experienced that myself. It's not something I'm proud of, and it's something that I will take to my grave. After reading this and studying these things and taking them to heart, I look back over my life and I see a few places where I committed myself to do something that was important, that was in the sight and hearing of Jehovah, and then I did not fulfill those promises. Now, when I first went into them, I would even go so far as to say I absolutely intended to fulfill those things. But for whatever of those reasons, and believe me, I have reasons at the time that I told myself and I've told others why I didn't follow through. I did intend to fulfill them, but then for whatever reason I didn't. But that's neither here nor there. I was obligated to fulfill them. Absolutely. And I have repented of it. I've sought Yah's forgiveness. I even, in one or two cases, tried to make amends. But alas, in some situations, I was able to fulfill it, far removed from the time I was supposed to do it. And in other situations, I was not. Because the time had passed, the situation at hand at that moment was not conducive to doing it. But I've learned, and I and I regret it every day that I think about it. So it's something that Yah takes very seriously. That unfortunately the secular world and the churches of God, their members don't even care about. We are a people who have no problem reneging on our vows, oaths, and obligations. We do it all the time. And I don't really want to get bogged down into this in a preaching situation. We talked enough about this last week in our Torah study in 121, but it is something Yah takes very seriously. And if we transgress it, we've committed a sin and we need to have it taken care of. Now, going back to our reading, on the surface, it seems that the hearts and loyalties of our Gadite, Reubenite, and Manasseh brethren were in the right place, at least as far as the text suggests. I'll get into some perspectives of Jewish thinkers, aka the Jewish sages, who thought otherwise later on in our discussion. Now, after some slightly contentious back and forth dialogue with Moshe and the three tribal leaders on the matter, our Gadite, Reubenite, and Manasseh brethren agreed to fight alongside their other tribal brethren until Canaan was under our complete control and possession. Verses 16 through 19. These tribes' willingness to obey Jehovah led Moshe to agree to their terms for taking possession of the lands east of the Jordan outside Canaan proper. Verses 20 through 24. Nevertheless, Moshe warned these tribes that if they failed to keep their word to assist their fellow Israelites in conquering Canaan, they would have to answer to Jehovah, as it would be a transgression of Yah's instructions. Verse 23. Indeed, these tribes would fulfill their obligation to Jehovah and the entire nation of Israel when they will fight alongside their tribal brethren to conquer and take possession of Canaan, as recorded in Joshua chapter 4 and chapter 22. Now, this, in terms of time frames between Joshua 4 and 22, and here in Numbers chapter 32, we're probably talking within a year or so. Because remember, this is now the second generation who is preparing to go in and take possession, conquer and take possession of Canaan, take possession of the land. And this is one of the first pieces of business at hand in this disposition or this disbursement of land rights, land property, and things being disseminated out to the tribes. And so we haven't gotten quite to the actual conquest yet, but this is the first order of business, so to speak, and it came out of nowhere. It took Moshe and probably the other 10 tribes by surprise when this was brought up. Thus, Moses agreed to the Gadites and Reubenites' proposal that they would fight alongside their brethren when they deployed to conquer Canaan. This is verse 17. And in the interim, the Gadites, Reubenites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh or Manasseh began to make a life for themselves in Sihon's and Og's former lands. Verse 16. More so, these three tribes vowed to deploy ahead of their brethren who would settle in Canaan under the leadership of Joshua. And they vowed to unite in armed force with their brethren in the conquest of Canaan. And once Canaan was fully conquered and their brethren received their inheritance of land, that is Nahala, they received the inheritance of land to the satisfaction of Jehovah first, Joshua second, the rest of us, then the Reubenites, the Gadites, and Manasseh tribes would then return to their homes in the lands east of the Jordan, verse 18. And these would also not lay any claim to any of the lands west of the Jordan, verse 19. In other words, they can't go back and claim land property, land rights over in Canaan. You make this big pronouncement, you want these lands, once owned by Sihon and Og of Bashan and Balak, the Moabites. You make a big hullabaloo about taking it and having it, well, you got it. But this then, we're done. Once we go and you keep your end of the bargain, we go in for the conquest and the taking in possession, the inheritance of the land over in Canaan proper. Then you can go ahead and come back and live out your life blessed, happy, and so forth and so forth. Now, I mentioned to you that there are some Jewish thinkers who have slightly, well, it's not even slightly, it's it's a pretty intense perspective on this, on our reading story here today. And they weigh in on this subject. And I was surprised to learn just how much thought that the ancient Jewish thinkers, the AKA the Jewish sages, put into this story. And I want to share some of their thoughts with you for the purposes of expanding our perspective on how our ancient and modern Jewish brethren see the merits of this story. Let's not be fooled. This is stuff that is contained in the Torah and Mishnah, and it's taught in the yeshivas over in various areas of the world where our Jewish brethren study Yah's Torah and the Talmud. And so they will end up taking perspectives and sides on these issues during the course of their training. But we find that towards the conclusion of the back and forth that occurred between Moshe, and the Gadites and Reubenites, before Moshe agreed to these tribes' petition, and to ensure that the record on the matter was firmly established, that these tribes would face serious consequences if they did not keep their vow or obligation to fight alongside their other tribal brethren in the conquest of Canaan. And Moshe warned these tribes. He says, if you do not do so, that is, you do not keep your word to fight alongside and help secure the promised land for your brethren, behold, you have sinned against Yahweh, Jehovah, and know that your sin will find you. Know that your sin will find you. Numbers chapter 32, verse 23, the Lexham English Bible translation. Now, the Talmudist thinkers labeled this conditional formulation Tana-i kapul. Tana-i kapul. What is that? I'm not speaking tongues, brethren. Tana-i kapul is a provision that is incorporated in most binding Hebrew contracts and written obligations. Such provisions spell out both, quote, the positive and negative outcomes, end quote, of the contract or obligation of a Jewish brother. And this is the quote I was giving you is from Baruch A. Levine's commentary on Numbers chapter 21, verse 36. He calls it a new translation with introduction and commentary. He said that this provision in contracts spell out both the positive and negative outcomes. Remember what it was. If you do not do so, behold, you have sinned against Jehovah, and know that your sin will find you. Okay. In other words, if you do such and such a thing as you promised, then such and such a thing will happen. And it's usually a good thing. However, if you don't do such and such a thing, that is, you fail to keep your word, then a certain bad thing will happen. You get it? Consider this Mishnaic commentary on Tanah e Kapul in relation to our reading. R. Meyer says, any condition which is not stated as is the condition of the sons of Gad and the sons of Reuben, that is, in both negative and positive formulations, is no condition, since it says, and Moses said to them, if the children of Gad and the children of Reuben will pass over. And it is written, and if they will not pass over armed. R. Hananiah B. Gamliel says, the matter had to be stated in just that way, for if not, it would have been implied that even in the land of Canaan, they would not inherit land. I know it's a whole lot of what? This is, you've got these two rabbis who are hashing out this whole concept of Tanah e Kapul. This understanding that if you do not do something, then you have sinned. But if you do what you promised, then good things will happen to you. Okay? So in our reading, Moshe stipulates that if our Gadite, Reubenite, and Manasseh or Manasseh brethren keep their obligation to Jehovah and their obligation to their brethren by arming themselves and fighting alongside their other tribal brethren on the west side of the Jordan until all military operations have been successfully completed, then they would be free to return to those lands that they'd chosen for their home. Okay? If these stated conditions were met, then the land they desire to dwell in the Transjordan would be granted unto them as their homeland. And this is verses 20 through 22. However, here is the thing. However, there's a however. If our Gadite, Reubenite, and Manasseh brethren reneged on their obligation to take part in the conquering of Canaan alongside their other tribal brethren, then they would have committed a serious sin, and their sin would most certainly find them. Verse 23. And so the leaders of Gad and Reuben would have to, if they wanted to live in the lands they liked, agreed to fulfill their responsibilities in the land and, most importantly, obey Jehovah's instructions regarding the taking of Canaan, verses 25 through 27. Now, verses 33 through 38 entail the official land grant to Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So everything is settled and everything is firmed out. Cool, everything's locked in. Now, all of this was well and good in my mind until I recently came upon Torah Resources' Tim Haig's commentary on our reading, which is entitled Studies in the Torah, the Book of Numbers. Mr. Haig, if you've been following me any length of time and listening or reading to these expositions on these Torah readings, you know that I have great respect, and I reference many of his Torah resources. in my studies as well as in my postings. Well, he introduces us to a rather negative perspective on the actions of the Gadites, Reubenites, and the half tribe of Manasseh or Manasseh here in our reading. And he shows in his commentary that some of the ancient Jewish thinkers, the sages, thought what he shows what some of them thought about their land petition. Turns out that the opinion of some ancient Jewish thinkers towards the Gadites, Reubenites, and Manasseh was that their hearts were evil. According to these ancient thinkers, these tribes eventually suffered loss because they selfishly sought to separate themselves from their other brethren in response to their greed and their sense of self-worth that was not in keeping with the will and purpose of Elohim. Haig illustrates the shocking perspective by recording the following Midrash commentary. Midrash Rabbah, Numbers 22.7. It's written, 3 gifts exist in the world: wisdom, valor, and wealth. Whoever has merited one can attain the world's delights. When is this so? When these gifts come from heaven by a means in keeping with Torah. Stop. Let's stop here. In other words, when one walks in Torah, according to this midrashic commentator, when one walks in Torah as they should, they will be appropriately blessed and they will receive their heart's desires. Okay, let's continue. Otherwise, they are worthless. That is, getting worldly blessings is worthless if they are not obtained through the provisions that Jehovah spells out in his Torah. Continuing, there are 2 wealthy men in the world. What does he mean by 2 wealthy men in the world? 2 types of unsavory wealthy souls in the world. One of Israel, his name was Korach, and the other of the nations or the Goyim, and his name was Haman. You recall Haman is infamous in the Esther story. Continuing, and both were destroyed. Why were they destroyed? Because their gift was not from Hashem, but something they grabbed for themselves. And here's the kicker, beloved. It is just so with Gad and Reuben. Rich, blessed with much flocks. That is, our forefathers measured wealth at times according to how much livestock one owned. So the writer writes, they were rich, they were blessed with flocks, they loved their wealth and dwelt outside the land of Israel. Therefore, they were the first tribe to be exiled. What caused this if not their isolating themselves from their brethren for material gain? Again, that was Midrash Rabbah, Numbers chapter 22.7. Well, it turns out that according to Scripture, it was the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali that were the first tribes to suffer exile at the hands of the Assyrian onslaught, as recorded in 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 29. However, some Jewish thinkers give this oversight a pass by taking a position that these tribes' exile was their living, these tribes, talking about Gad and Reuben, that their exile was their living outside the land of promise. That is, they had a self-imposed exile, if you will. But let's face it, why quibble over scriptural facts when you are a renowned Jewish sage, right? But clearly this thinker who wrote this, who penned this midrasha, this thinker held a rather nasty biased view of our Gadite and Reubenite brethren because these tribes established their homes in the Transjordanian region as opposed to joining their other tribal brethren in Canaan west of the Jordan. Interestingly, these ancient Jewish thinkers didn't stop in their criticism of these tribes' perceived greed-driven actions. Some thinkers criticized them for their lack of faith, their lack of belief in Jehovah. These noted that the leaders of these tribes failed to even mention Jehovah in their petition to Moshe or Moses. This in contrast with Moses or Moshe's mention of Jehovah some 5 times in his discourse with them over this land grant issue. Numbers chapter 20, verse 20, Numbers chapter 32, verses 20 through 22, sorry. And the thinkers argue that these leaders were solely focused on their wealth, and they did not see any true need for Jehovah or any relationship with their tribal brethren. What is this telling you? We're going back to this concept that we talked about earlier. What was it? It was that issue of Heni. It was the discussion we talked about of Hani and Tenuah. Remember Hani and Tenuah? Tenuah, most importantly, in that we treat the things, the plans, the will of Yah as if it's nothing. This is what the so-called Jewish thinkers, their sages, were pinning on the Gadites and the Reubenites. Very interesting. And not to be done with their criticism of Gad and Reuben in relationship to their perceived faithlessness and their materialism, other thinkers saw these as having an inaccurate understanding of Yah's plan for Israel and Israel's conquering of the land. These, the thinkers contended, we're talking about Gad and Reuben and the half-tribe of Manasseh. These believed, according to the thinkers, that Jehovah was going to somehow miraculously eliminate the inhabitants of Canaan, the present ones. He was going to just snap and they'd be gone and simply hand the land over to their other tribal brethren. That's what somehow that's how they got into the minds of the Gadites and the Reubenites, that's how they thought. So if in their minds, Reuben and Gad saw no need to get involved in that which Jehovah clearly had under control and within his sovereign purview. I find it interesting when we're able to get into the minds of these patriarchs and be able to interpret what they were thinking. But Haig, in response to this criticism, asserts, quote, the conquest of the land would be done through Jehovah's mighty hand, but it would require warfare. I will deliver the inhabitants, Yah says, of the land into the hand. And to enjoy Yah's covenant promises requires obedient participation. And this is in Tim Haig's book, his commentary on the book of Numbers. And I say amen to that. Indeed, whenever Yah has something, he promises something, he promises to deliver something, such as in the case of delivering the land of promise to his people, well, the people are going to have to do something to get it. Yah's going to take care of the heavy lifting, but our folks will have to go in and conquer the land. And in many cases, if you ever read the book of Joshua, and if you've ever, just last week we talked about when, I forgot who it was or which nation was overtaken, we lost nobody. Not one Israelite was lost. Yeah, it was our destruction. We had marked for destruction the Midianites. Remember those groups, that group that was instrumental in causing the apostasy, our apostasy with the Midianites and the Baal of Peor, disgusting worship that ensued with the women therein. And Yah directed us to take out Midian, which we did, and not a single soul was lost. It wasn't that Israel wasn't going to go in and do anything, that Yah was going to somehow just destroy miraculously Midian, and that would have been it, and we would never have any more issues with Midian, with the Midianites. But that wasn't the case. We had to go in and take care of business, and Yah miraculously protected us from losing a single soul. But everybody else that Yah targeted was wiped out by us. Haig gives wide credence, however, to the criticisms of the Jewish thinkers, but he stops short of fully committing himself to their perspectives, their hating perspective, for lack of a better description, towards the Gadites and Reubenites and Manasseh. And his major criticism of the Reubenites and Gadites and Manasseh is centered on their perceived self-centeredness, their initial lack of concern for the well-being of their Israelite brethren. And I understand his well-worded position, and I, to a lesser or greater extent, somewhat agree with him. However, I do not go so far as to suggest that these three tribes were sinful in their petition to settle in the Transjordan as opposed to Canaan proper. You know, you don't get anything if you don't ask. Seems to me that if Jehovah was truly upset with Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh, he would not have permitted the arrangement to go through as recorded in our reading. I would think you would agree. If these tribes were about some monkey business and were willing to sell out their other tribal brethren in order to settle on land that was more conducive, more useful, more synergistic to their present livestock situation, well, Moses certainly addressed and put a stop to those concerns. And I believe what happened in our reading regarding these three tribes and the land they wanted for their homes was well within Yah's permissive will. What do I mean by being in Yah's permissive will? I mean that although the actions of an individual, and in this case a group of individuals, may not fall within Yah's original plans, he will, however, make allowances for certain actions of these individuals or groups of people to take place. Unfortunately, some of those actions may not always work out to the best. They may come with some far-reaching generational consequences. And a prime example of such consequences coming out of those things Yah allows through his permissive will is manifested, is realized in the practice of polygamy that so many of our ancients committed themselves to. You all know, Yah did not say you cannot be in a polygamous relationship. He wasn't happy about it, but he allowed it. We wouldn't have the 12 tribes without it. But look how much trouble it has always caused throughout the centuries when man engages in more than one wife. Man was designed and created, and the purpose of Yah was for man to have one wife. There was to be one man and one woman, and the union therein was to be the most synergistic relationship outside of a man's relationship with Jehovah, outside of a woman's relationship with Jehovah. This would be the second level of intense relationship that would catapult anyone's relationship with Jehovah to the highest level possible. Because you can achieve so much more when you have two in agreement. So I find it, Moses certainly addressed, he put to stop any of the concerns. And so things were settled and things worked out. And it was well within Yah's permissive will that these three tribes settle in the Transjordan. At least we don't get any clue in our text that there was a problem with the three tribes settling outside of the Canaan proper. But these are some of the things that the thinkers, our ancient Jewish brethren thinkers, thought about in terms of this passage. It's very interesting to me to actually come across these things and really get a sense of what the thinking is about these passages. I tell you, it opened up my eyes to areas and vistas of this. I've read this passage many times in my forays through the scriptures and in my Torah studies. I mean, I've been keeping the Torah reading cycles for a number of years, and of course, every year or every other year or so, I read this. But this really took me for a loop when I read these. But anyway, so I need to bring this to a close. So what are the, I'm going to keep this to an hour. We're at 55 minutes. So what are the takeaways from this week's reading? I think there's many, but I'm going to narrow these down to three. The first one, Yah requires us to fulfill the vows, the promises, the oaths, and obligations that we make to him and our fellow man. This is a carryover, of course, from last week's reading. So we had to hear a reiteration of last week's, which says to me that if Yah gives us a commandments that house this concept of making vows, oaths, and obligations, that it's important. And when we transgress it, we sin. Secondly, despite the many promises that Yah has made to us, his chosen ones, we are still required, dare I say we're obligated to act when he says act and do whatever he directs us to do at the time he says move. There are no free lunches in Yah's great work of redemption, restoration, and rest and salvation. So we are going to have to obey his words and listen to his still small voice and follow his lead as he so provides and directs. And lastly, number three, despite my disagreements with the ancient Jewish thinkers as it relates to their criticisms of the Gadites and the Reubenites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, how they perceived the behaviors of these three tribes as being sinful, these thinkers, I will concede that they provide us with food for thought. And it behooves us, as Yah's set-apart people, to always keep Yah and his will in front of our own desires, plans, and will. In fact, Yah's will, Yah's purpose should always be our purpose, should always be our will, should always be our desire. Not my will, but your will, our master said to his father at the eve of his crucifixion. Furthermore, we should always obey Yah's Torah of loving him with our whole being and loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, such that we place Yah and the well-being of our brothers and sisters ahead of our own interest. Last, our material possessions must be made fully subject to the will, purpose, and plans of Yah. Greed, selfishness have no place in the hearts, minds, and souls of Yah's people. If left unchecked, greed, selfishness will adversely impact our intimate covenant relationship with the creator of the universe. In fact, in opposition to greed and selfishness potentially overtaking his disciples at any time in their walk, Master Yeshua directed us to store up our treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust corrupts and where thieves do not break through nor steal. Matthew chapter 6, verse 20. And if our wealth gets in the way of our relationship with Master Yeshua, And in the way of our commission as his emissaries, he instructs us to sell that which we possess and give the proceeds to the poor and follow him. Matthew chapter 19, verse 21, Luke chapter 18, verse 22, Mark chapter 10, verse 21. And with that, I bring this thoughts and reflections to a close. Have a blessed and overcoming Sabbath and week in Yeshua Messiah. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Take care.